Good evening and welcome to Metro Focus. I'm Jenna Flanagan. Mentally ill and living on their own, but are they ready to do so? Under an ambitious housing plan provided by the state, thousands of mentally ill New Yorkers are offered the chance to move out of adult homes and into subsidized apartments. But for many, this sudden shift towards independence has proven to be hazardous and even deadly. In a new documentary titled Right to Fail, Frontline, in partnership with ProPublica, investigates this faulty housing system. Here's a look.
It was a landmark ruling. Thousands of New Yorkers with severe mental illness had a right to live on their own.
There was a huge question about whether people that had been institutionalized can live successfully in the community.
And a right to fail.
They just brought me there and said, ta-da!
Frontline and ProPublica investigate.
Did it feel like you were left alone?
I had no company, actually.
The question is, when do you take away somebody's liberty?
Tuesday at 10, 9 Central on most PBS stations.
Here with more on this investigation is Frontline correspondent Joaquin Sapien. Joaquin, welcome to the program.
Thanks, it's good to be back.
So this was a difficult one, I think, for me to watch because we're talking about some of the most marginalized people in society. So first, just explain to people what it is that we're talking about with mentally ill people in adult housing and then the subsidized housing.
So the focus of the story is on residents of what are called adult homes, which are essentially large group homes scattered throughout the outskirts of New York City. And they were the subject of a really damning series of stories in the New York Times in 2002 about how miserable the conditions there were. People had flung themselves off rooftops. They were dying in their rooms due to a lack of air conditioning. There was a lot of medical procedures that people didn't actually need that the operators were able to profit from. And all of this resulted in a lawsuit that was filed in Brooklyn federal court. And it took a long time for the litigation to play out, but ultimately there was a settlement in which these people were then offered a chance to live on their own in what's called scattered site supported housing, which is basically a chance for you to live independently, the same as anyone else would, in an apartment with some services in place. The idea is that you're going to have a whole team of professionals, each with their own distinct area of expertise. It's going to help you make this adjustment into independent living. But what we found is that those supports often kind of fell short of the needs of the people who had moved, and in a number of cases, there were people who had such severe mental health issues that it was questionable as to whether they should actually have this opportunity to begin with.
And that sort of ties into the title of the film itself, The Right to Fail. That seems to have been part of this settlement, was that not only do people have the right to try and live on their own, but they do have the right to fail at it, but the film makes clear as to exactly whose fault those failures are.
Right. So through the settlement, it was determined that these people had been sort of deprived of their civil rights, that they had been segregated from the rest of society and forced to live in group homes that they did not necessarily have to live in, and that they had to be given the chance to succeed and also the right to fail on their own. And so that's where the title comes from, is this concept. You often hear it described as also the dignity of risk, because obviously with people as compromised as these folks, there is inherently going to be some risk involved in their living on their own, which is why you really need a very strong support system intact to make sure that they succeed.
And so to sort of lay bare what you were finding as to what was going on, there were some cases that you followed very closely, and one that seemed to be the most engaging was that of a gentleman, Mr. Bunch. Tell us about him.
So we were told early on about a person named Nestor Bunch, whose experience in supported housing seemed to reflect many of its biggest shortcomings. He had moved into a number of apartments over the course of about 15 or so months. The first one, it was his very first apartment living on his own. This is a person with very serious schizophrenia who hallucinates, who hears voices, who has never before lived by himself. And he moved into this apartment where he had trouble keeping enough food stocked in his refrigerator, keeping up with paying bills, things like that. And he fell into a pretty serious depression. He began to have suicidal thoughts. He was hospitalized for that. And the people involved in his care, the social service agencies involved in his care, decided that what he really needed was to live with a roommate. And so they paired him with a man named Bernard Walker, and that pairing lasted a matter of weeks. Nestor discovered Bernard naked and dead during a blizzard in the foyer of their apartment building out in Jamaica, Queens. And Nestor sort of spiraled again. He went back into a psychiatric ward a couple of times, came out, moved in with another roommate. That roommate felt that he was being asked to take care of Nestor, and he was overwhelmed by that assignment, which he didn't feel he deserved. So then Nestor moved into one more apartment, and this was occupied by a person who also had schizophrenia, had a very serious alcohol problem, and actually a history of domestic violence. And as it turns out, Nestor was discovered in that apartment very seriously injured. His ribs were broken, he had kidney damage, and even then there was an effort to try to keep him in his own apartment in independent housing. Finally, he came out and moved back into a group home and was discovered on the street again outside of a police station with hypothermia and very seriously delusional, and was hospitalized. And now he's in he's back in independent housing, but with much more services in place, and he's actually doing quite well.
And so I guess the question then becomes, who is really responsible for these people once they're put into these subsidized apartments? Because it sounds like Nestor was very much on his own.
That's a really important question, and I think what we found was that responsibility was diffused across so many actors that there's ample space for finger pointing among all of them. There's one contractor that's responsible for housing. There's another contractor responsible for medical services. There's other people who are responsible for psychiatric care. These apartments are not actually licensed by the Office of Mental Health, but the Office of Mental Health does have some responsibility to oversee some of these social service agencies. So there's all of these different actors. It's kind of a dizzying array of people who each are supposed to be responsible for their own corner of this. And what happens is it's very unclear who ultimately is accountable when something like this goes terribly wrong.
All right, well, first of all, thank you so much for your reporting, because I think this is a problem that we talk so much about mentally ill people in New York City and how best to treat them, et cetera. But this is definitely something that most people, I'm sure, don't know about. So thank you so much for your reporting. And of course, we will be looking to see if something comes of having this story now broadcast on Frontline.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Right to Fail premieres on PBS on Tuesday, February 26th at 10 p.m. For additional airtimes and other viewing opportunities, you can visit our website at metrofocus.org.